He's one of our Launchpad favorites, Mike Trujillo. He is the founder of the Eagle Academy. That is perhaps his primary focus right this minute, but he is a man of many skills and talents. And as you will see from this little bio, he has held a variety of jobs throughout his career. His specialty is product management and helping businesses to build and grow new teams. He has also developed several job hunting skills that he likes to share with fellow job seekers. He has held leadership roles at Nokia, Texas Instruments, Accenture, CSC, AMD, Digital Equipment Corporation, Broadframe, Soft Vision, and more. Starting in the 8th grade, he was recognized by his customers for outstanding service and was awarded Paperboy of the Month by the local newspaper. And this is really true. I have absolutely no doubt that happened. He has brought those same characteristics to his adulthood. He has been working hard, providing exceptional products and services to his customers ever since. He is the founder of the Eagle Academy, which is a leadership program for aspiring youth leaders. And with no more delay, I give you the legendary Mike Trujillo.
Ooh. Too bad we don't have an audience, because I feel like I walk out to thunderous applause, but thank you very much, Kathy. My name is Mike Trujillo, and I tell everyone I'm a professional job hunter. And so I'm really good at coaching people and had a lot of failures in my job search. And I find that I've learned a lot of lessons from that. And that's what I'll be sharing today. Let me get started by sharing my screen. And I'm kind of very interactive, so I'm not being able to watch the chat a whole lot. But if you're brave enough, if you've got a good question, and you're brave enough to unmute your phone and not embarrass yourself, you might want to and ponder in for a quick question now and again. If it gets too bad, I'll be direct with you and say we should move on. I was last week or 2 weeks ago, I was actually in an interview, and Shannon had hit me up for speaking, and I was trying to come up with a name, and then all of a sudden I was really thinking of the Hunger Games and this dysphorean kind of world that we live in when it comes to interviews, and that became the title of the talk. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the games and a little bit how you can understand how to game the game, basically, and some tips and techniques that might help you along the way. I want to first thank Kathy and Shannon. And most importantly, I got one of the best gifts ever. My last talk when we were at the when we were actually meeting face to face, and it's a Mr. Candle done kind of like a holy candle, and my RBG, which my coffee's on it right now, coaster, and those were thank you gifts. But I want to thank all what they do, because not just in this club, but I see them in lots of other activities outside throughout Austin in promoting job seekers all around town, and they're an unbelievable pair, and we should be very grateful for their services. Every time I'm in a presentation, the first question that comes up in chat is, can I look at the presentation deck? So I'm giving you a lot of information. Take a moment here, and Shannon, if you don't mind, pop the URL. Actually, I can do it because, well, I can't. Take a look at the URL, write it down. It's case sensitive, bit.ly launchpad ATX. You'll see it a little bit later, or if you have a camera, you can take a picture of it, and it should get you right to the site. It'll give you to the presentation and a lot of the other materials. In my bio that Kathy mentioned, here's an actual real picture of it. And the reason why I have it in here is years ago, I'm in an interview, and I'm not cutting on age. This is not meant to be a cut. It's the reality of how different generations look at themselves and how we value each other. And it really, I was in an interview years ago in an office of a young professional, and on her wall were a list of basically like Employee of the Week kind of awards that she had earned at the company. And they were on her LinkedIn profile, and there was little trophies in her office. And I was sitting there thinking, well, my generation, we didn't really have any things we look back upon and patted, and got a little boost out of. In fact, many of us would probably be very fortunate to have gotten a compliment from a boss within a whole year. That's very common in an older generation. So I added this in as a bio as just kind of a reflection of the different times. Now you might notice this was in 1974. And I used to hide that date, but I'm actually promoting a little bit more. But I just want to mention that you're going to be competing in a workforce with multiple generations and multiple values. Don't mock it; it's there. Understand it. Try to understand how to value it as best you can. But that's sort of the first step. I'm reading your comment, Shannon, and now I just can't go. I can't go on it anymore. I'm being harassed. Um, So although I'm going to focus on the interview games and the actual interview games, before we start, I think it's super important for you to understand of the things you have to do before you even really start making serious efforts at your interviews. And I'm going to cover each one of these a little bit more in detail, but I'm going to give you a quick summary. If you've ever been to any kind of self-help or any job coaching, the first thing they try to do is do this kind of rough assessment, and I call it, is your head on straight? Years ago, I was at one of the job clubs in town, and there was a gentleman sitting in the lobby with his head buried in his hands. Like literally his head was buried in his hands in a chair. And I never saw a person so low in my life. And I recognized there's no way this guy's going to find a job right at that moment. Like he's mentally not ready for that kind of job search. I'll talk a little bit more about that and what we're going to do with it. But that's kind of the first step. Often job seekers, I ask, what are you looking for? And there's a hemming and hawing. There's not a lot of real strong focus. And so you really need to know very clearly what you want. I'm going to show you some tools on that. We're not going to cover that here because we're talking about interviews. You need to really understand what your story is. What are you trying to say to your employer? And what is it you're really looking for? And how do you communicate that? And then we'll get into a little note on the job hunt, and then we'll get really into the interview games. But before you do the interviews, I just want to make sure everything else is set. So what we'll do is, I want you to right now, you're going to record, take a paper and pencil. You're going to have some interactive stuff, and we're going to see how we can just flare up the chat. I was going to try to do meeting rooms, or at least breakout rooms, but that's going to be too difficult with this large of a crowd. So instead, I'd like you to take a pencil and paper, and why don't you write the number down that you think mentally, how ready are you right now for your job search? Meaning you're confident, you're in good spirits, you think you've got a good line on stuff, you look forward to the work. That's sort of the 9s and 10s, or 1s and 2s are like you're dreading it, you're depressed, you can't sleep at nights. Write them down. And there's some books, and we'll talk about the ways you can get help on this later, but write that down. And then next, on a scale of 1 to 10, how focused are you on that job search? On a 10, do you know the companies you want to work for, the roles that you want to work for, the salary and the job titles? Those are like 10s. I kind of want to do, education because I like teaching, but you have no teaching skills. That's more like at least but you're not really ready for it yet. Those would be more like 2s and 3s. So write those two numbers down. And let's just blow up the chat and type the first number plus second number and throw that in chat for me. So if you're a 5 and a 5, there we go. A 9 and a 9. All right, Robert. We have an 11. I'm not sure what that means, David. A 1 and a 1, maybe? A 1 and a 7. Okay, that's what that means. Okay, 1 and a 6. 1 and a 6. Okay. Any more? Bob Vance, you got any numbers in here for me? Bob Vance from Vance Refrigeration's on the call, by the way. We got 8s and 5s. Lots of 1s in the beginning. That's alarming. Apples and oranges. I like that, Andrew. So why I'm mentioning this is that those are the areas you need to be focusing on. If you're like below a 7, you really need to be focusing on those areas. And I'll give you some books to help you out along the way. The next one I'm plagiarizing from one of my favorite speakers at Job Club, and anytime I see him talk, I try to attend, and that is Alex McCarthy. Alex and I actually started work at the same company. Didn't know it until fairly recently. We're roughly the same age and have a lot of the weird background things that we've been doing. He's actually quite successful as a job coach. I'm an aspiring job coach. And Alex has this thing that he asks that you should be able to answer without even blinking. And it's what he calls the 3 questions. What do you why are you looking, right? If you're a potential job, you're looking at a company, they're going to want to know why you're looking. Are you unemployed? Are you employed? What's your story? Why are you looking? What are you looking for? Which we talked about that before. How clear do you know what you want? And why are you great at it? And I'm not going to get into a whole lot of this right now because that's not the nature of the talk, but he has an excellent talk on this. And I'm going to provide you his worksheets, a reference to a book he references, plus his talk he did on Launchpad. But you have to nail this. Because you can nail this part, the next part of the interview becomes a lot easier. Really know clearly why you're looking. And if you don't have a good story, make up a story that makes sense. What are you looking for and why are you great at it? And the why you're great at it will involve SOAR stories. We'll talk about those later. That is, I forget the acronym. It'll come up later. A situation, objective, action, and results. It's how you tell the story on that. Okay, and Alex has done several talks, and I actually have 2 of his links in here. But make sure you can nail these down. You gotta make sure you're crisp. You can nail them down in under a minute. The job hunt, which you probably see all the time, and you're gonna hear a lot of things about Indeed and Glassdoor and LinkedIn and ATS tools and Job Scan, and snip, done. I hate them. I hate them all. You're in a much more competitive space right now where a lot of recruiters are looking at hundreds of resumes now for every job posting. And although those might give you a slight edge, networking is your biggest advantage. I see you're taking advantage of chat in here. What I'd recommend for everyone that's on here is after you save the chat, look at everyone who's provided a profile, look them up and see if they're worthwhile connecting. Not saying they're not worthwhile, but someone that's related to you. Bob Woodcock and I, that's how we connected through Robert, I should say. We connected through this group. I saw his profile and he's networked with me, was what he talked about, and we've connected and we've spoken several times afterwards. So I highly encourage that networking to be done, not necessarily through here, but offline, and take advantage of this, especially when you need help. All right, so let's get into the actual games now. So let the games begin. And why don't we just take a quick interruption here? And let me just, I think I have an hour and I'm going to take whatever time. They're not going to kick me off. So what I'd like you to do is if there's anything on that thing I just discussed, anything on your numbers, anything that you've looked at that you just want a little guidance or you want a little feedback on, you want to share with the group, you want to someone unmute your phone and feel free to speak. Or not. I'm assuming I did such a great job that you don't need to share anymore. You've gotten everything that you got out of that. So we're going to keep going then. Okay. So after I put this whole this presentation together, I forgot one slide and I added it at the very beginning, and I'm just going to reference it here. One of the things about applying at a job, and even if you network well and you get into the company and now you're interviewing, you need to go back and go through the job description with really sharp eyes. You're not going in thinking, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, but you need to go into understanding where your top strengths match their requests. And things at the top of the job description are usually higher priority for the client, and things in the bottom are less. And once in a while, you're going to see something in the job description that just seems a little bit out of place. And what you're doing is you're making sure that you understand how well you really fit objectively to that. I constantly look at job descriptions knowing I can do them, but then I have to put myself in the shoe of the employer. Do I really have the background and the skills on paper and in real life that really line up to that? Yeah, I could figure stuff out, but do I really have those skills? Can I bring them to them on day one and really be objective when you look at that job description? So that's all we're going to talk about on the resume. We're going to talk more about the interviews from now. So the typical interview flow I've been discovering, and I'd be curious to see how others are experiencing this as well, is I've noticed the following: that interviews used to be phone screen, and then you would be like a whole day interview on site. That was kind of common. Um, and there'd be a little screening in the beginning, but really you'd be kind of put into the thrust of it pretty quickly. And with COVID, and I also think with some changes in the way the interviews are done, I'm finding a certain cadence with them. I kind of walk you through. Uh, if you get a good contact into the company and you applied, and they've either through a referral or through you got lucky in getting an online one to get a response back, you generally are approached by a recruiter very quickly for a 30-minute phone screen. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then, if you make it through that first round, you will then have what I think they're calling it a benchmark interview. It's or a baseline interview. I've heard the term a couple times, but I haven't been able to find it in my research. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that's from the hiring manager. Usually the hiring manager goes last, but I'm noticing more and more frequently the hiring manager or a person within the reporting chain is the first interview. And they usually are video in 30 minutes or so. And then there'll be like a team meeting where you meet with multiple members of the team. Some companies do what I call a performance of skills resume interview. That might be a 1 week assignment that you go through, and you're looking to put together a marketing program for a particular product that they're launching. And you're going to be presenting it to a bunch of people at the end. There's usually scenarios. They're not real work. They're like a scenario or an abstract of what they're doing. It's not like they're really getting free work from you. They're actually trying to see how you work. I've actually had this twice in my career. Actually, one of them, they actually paid me a week, and I sat on their team and participated in their product meetings. So I call it a performance of skills, and that's a way to see how well you fit. And then sometimes, especially for a lot of the startup companies, an executive or sometimes the founder of the company will want to interview with you. Cloudflare is a fairly large company, and their final interview generally is an executive of the company, one of the founders. And I'm not going to cover those specifically in this talk. We're going to focus on the first three, which are the ones I think are the most gut-wrenching to get through, and the other ones are kind of become more unique to your fields. And I can't really help you coach, but you're going to find ways of getting help on those. For the 30-minute phone screen, what you're looking at is rarely do they ever start on time. It always seems the recruiter is always running a little bit late. They usually have a back-to-back-to-backs. And although it's a 30-minute meeting, it's really a 20-minute meeting. And so make sure that you're thinking of keeping your answers very brief and to the point. They may start late, but you end on time. They are really doing is to verify your resume, and they start doing this "do you fit" kind of thing. We'll talk about that a little bit. I find that I really hate the concept, but we'll talk about the challenges you have with fitting here in Austin. Regardless of whether the meeting started late or not, you are to end it on time or at least a minute early if they have a hard stop, and give them the opportunity to say, no, we can go later. That's super important. These tend to be very quick. You either will gel with the recruiter very quickly. Again, they're just validating that your resume is accurate, and they're going to ask you, why do you want to work here, which is a very common question. We'll talk about the questions a little bit later. The next interview tends to be the benchmarking interview, and this one is this idea of, do you meet the do you meet the requirements that we're really looking for? And they're going to, and I'll give you some kinds of questions, but they tend to be, they'll try to validate some of the work that you're doing with examples. And do you fit with the company? And they tend to be video oriented. You'll notice that some are very professional and some are not. And some of the managers are quite busy, and sometimes they're not really that well prepared, depending on the company. But they always ask you and give you some time to ask questions, and this is a good opportunity for you to shine in some of your examples. So they tend to ask questions. If you make it to the next round, this is where you meet with the team. And these will be a series of 30-minute interviews. I did one recently. It was 3.5 hours, but it was like 6 interviews or 5 interviews. And there's sometimes gang interviews, so there's more than one person on. They have a list of questions, so you have to keep your answers as quick as possible or clear as possible down to just a few moments. They're really testing, can I work with you? I'm a marketing person working on your product. Do you understand what I do? Can we work together? I have an example of something that went bad, and I want you to see how you would have handled it, right? So that's kind of what's going on with these people. Well, often these people don't understand the role that you're in, and so if you're a marketer, they're going to think that you do social media only, and so they'll ask you a bunch of social media questions. If you're a product manager like I am, they think all you do is roadmaps, and they'll ask you a ton of roadmap questions. So really help to just understand the kinds of questions that come in. We'll talk a little bit about how to pivot from those. And again, what they're really looking for is, can I work with you? And they want to know specifically the job functions, and then everyone's going to give you a little opportunity to ask questions. So at a high level, here's how the game is being played. Your potential employer is trying to understand how you fit. Now, I hate that concept, because often what will happen is they don't really think that they're a tribe or a clique of people, but often they are. And sometimes if you don't fit in that clique, it's going to be hard to break in. So I'm 59 years old, and I'm working with talking to a lot of software companies where my boss and maybe the VPs of the group are probably in their 40s. They don't really say it. They're feeling it. They don't understand it, but probably not a good fit. And that's a challenge. We'll talk a little bit about how to address that later. The potential employee should be knowing, like I mentioned, you're clear on what you're looking for. You're clear on the job. You should be very clear on your superpowers. You should be very clear of where your strengths are and what you bring to that role. And they're going to volley a bunch of questions your way in different forms, and you are trying in every way you can to reflect your superpowers in the answers. I'll give you some techniques on how to go off and do that. You've probably been on these before, so you probably will know that there are different kinds of questions. There's what I call the softball questions, the ones that are, you should expect them. We'll go over what they are specifically. Behavioral questions, Alex McCarthy has a great video on that. We'll touch on that a little bit on the behavioral questions. Situational questions, which are kind of similar, but they're more like, we'll talk about those. And then there'll be some validation of your skills. So if you're an accountant and they're going to, and you use certain software tools, they may ask you a very specific question about the tool to just make sure that you really understand the tool. If you're a developer and you say you're a Python coder, you might actually have some Python questions or a short little example code for you to look at and troubleshoot in front of them. So verification is an important part of it as well. Shannon, any good questions coming up yet? I just hear a lot of no questions yet.
Kathy is usually our monitor, so Kathy,
okay, yeah.
Take that.
Any questions coming up yet?
Yes. Oh well, maybe she's indisposed. Somebody's asked, in the multiple individual usual interviews, should you pitch different strengths, jobs, experiences in each, or do the same ones with all of them?
I think if you have superpowers, you're trying to promote the superpowers. You may have to pivot what the superpowers, how they value or how they make a difference to that team. One of the challenges you have that a lot of us have who have a lot of experience is that we want to try to jam all that experience into every question, and really you have to step back and say, what are the 3 or 4 big things that I'm going to be that I really think are important for this role, and you promote them, promote in them. One of the things about the team that when you are interviewing with the team is spend a little time to understand what they are, who the people are. And often if you've been doing this kind of job long enough, regardless of what vocation you're in, you should have a good understanding of what these groups do. And so you can anticipate some of those questions. But I don't I think also they compare notes at the end. Most good companies will compare notes. So if you start giving kind of different answers to different people, um, make sure it makes sense to you and make sure it makes sense to the other people. But I think they're looking for clarity and consistency in the interview as well. Hopefully that helps. If not, feel free to answer a follow-up question. Anything else?
Yeah, this is from me, and it's less a question, more an observation. There are sometimes interviewers that they really don't know how to interview.
Mhm.
They'll ask you kind of like, where do you see yourself in five? Just the whole, panoply of all the same things that just make you want to roll your eyes.
Right.
And in those, I think that maybe it's best that you come back with a behavioral answer if they're not going to give you a behavioral question.
Right. That's excellent. What I did on one of my interviews, I had interviewed with a a person who was going to be on my team, and he was right out of college, and he had no idea even the kinds of questions to ask. And I was very nice and said, "Well, let me help you," and recognizing, this is what I think your role is. Does that make sense? Well, these are the things that you'd be interfacing with me on. What would be the kind of questions you'd ask around these areas, and kind of help form that. But as we get into these stories, as Shannon mentioned, these stories you're going to be talking about are your narratives that will help. You could use them in examples. And I'll think of some examples a little bit later, but often there's a story. Like, I love telling stories, and I can find using a story multiple different ways. If I want to prove, if I want to be funny, if I want to tell a life lesson about something, you can use these stories multiple ways, and you'll if you practice a little bit, it'll come to you. But don't be surprised by them not knowing you, not understanding and reading your resume, not really having a clue of what you're doing, and you're really there to be you've done the research. We'll talk a little bit about a very deep analysis. I'm not going to cover it here, but I did a talk on this earlier, and we'll talk about different ways you can take control of the meeting if you feel bold enough to do it, and how you would show them what you're going to do on the first 30, 60, 90 days that you're working at the company. And that's pretty bold, but sometimes that makes sense if you're hungry enough for a job. I'm going to keep moving on. So we talked about these. So we're going to start off with the softball questions. And the first question they always ask you is, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I made the mistake, and I realized what a mistake it was, by giving them the chronological answer. I didn't do the paperboy story, didn't start there, but I started with my first job out of work and a little chronology, and it just kind of droned on forever. And what I've learned in this process is provide short, compact answers and try to do it in under a minute. My favorite example of this comes from Kimberly Sprite. I know her from Toastmasters, and I saw this on her LinkedIn page. This is the best. Have you ever heard of the F-15? I bought 36 of them. That's all you got to say, right? And that's the mic drop. And she has some more behind it, but that was really awesome. I mean, that was really an effective way of learning a little bit about her. Now, she's actually a coach now. She doesn't buy fighter jets, but I found that was a really neat way of introducing yourself, making a big impression. Other kinds of softball questions. How did you hear about the position? Why do you want to work here? Or why do you want this job? Why should we hire you? It's a little bold, but I heard that those questions come up. Are you interviewing anywhere else? That's a very common question. And I'd like to give a little mystery answer so they feel at least there's some urgency for them moving forward with you. But don't give a lot of details. And then the awkward salary discussion comes up often, and you need to have a really good answer on those. What I tend to do is I tell them, well, I've been researching this role on Glassdoor. The salary ranges are X through Y. I think it's a competitive salary and it works well for me. What do you think? And often they're pretty open and give you feedback, and it's not something you're basically using other people's evidence. So you get your pencils and papers out. We're going to do a little question, a little test here. I'd like you to think about this first question about, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? What you're going to do is you're going to do something kind of very basic. We're not going to be the Kimberly level quite yet, but we're going to make this very basic for you. And I want you to say that, I am a blank, What is the job you're looking for? I'm a product manager. I'm an accountant. I'm a program manager. I'm a whatever your role is. You're going to have a certain passion that makes you a little bit different than other people, right? There are 10,000 product managers in Austin. What's different about me? Well, I'm passionate about helping companies in transition, right? And then I also have to list my accomplishments that back that up. And so I've helped teams that have been through big changes, either through acquisition or through mergers at Nokia, Accenture, and CSC. And I can follow up with stories, boom, 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 boom. And that's a great example of tell me a bit about yourself without the chronological, exhausting, resume dump. Hopefully they've read the resume. So we're going to take a few moments here, and I want you to just be thinking about this. I was going to play some Jeopardy music, but I forgot to put it in the video. But take a minute to do it. As you come up with some ideas, throw them into chat. I may have put some of you on the spot because this takes a little while. Some of you actually have like a go-to branding statement. So if you got a go-to branding statement, throw that in there as well. Robert, do you have one of those? You should have one of those. Mr. Woodcock.
You may not be able to. Okay,
Actually,
here it
helping
is.
people get the money that is coming to them.
So do you want me to say it, or do you want me
Yeah,
to
you say it. Go ahead and say
put
it.
it in chat? So
No,
I
say
am I am a lean, agile leader and coach. I am passionate about building up people and teams. I have increased product revenue by 6 times, saved over 5.5 million in annual costs, and led a global team of engineers that were 100 people.
Oh, it's a thought or a question. Ever see a resume where you used computers yellow highlighter to emphasize key items in it? For example, saved the government millions of taxpayer dollars. How did it go over? And would it get your resume thrown out by the scanner software that they use? Do you know that?
So my opinion, I'll give you an opinion. The automatic tracking systems, ATS, which you've probably heard a million things about, they literally are grabbing text, and they're also learning how people are doing games on white text. I tried that experiment by throwing a bunch of white text in a resume and hiding it, the last page. And I think they're pretty smart at detecting that and ignoring it. So the ATS doesn't really worry about your formatting, but you should have a well-formatted resume that people can view and not be afraid to use it. So the techniques that you're going to use to defeat the ATS evil empire, you can almost do a plain text resume. It doesn't really matter. But when you actually have a PDF document you're going to share or a Word document you're going to share, I like using bold, or you can use yellow. Don't go crazy on it. Some people use very nice, well-designed graphical ones with charts and whatnot. Those are kind of neat. But do what's comfortable for you. Just don't overdo it, right? Just try to keep it simple and a simple way of promoting the key items that you want to just show up in your resume. I use bold. Good question.
Okay, here's David's elevator pitch. I'm an art director, creative director. I'm passionate about collaboration and understanding the content communicated. I have learned the languages of architectural design, the semiconductor industry, and the luxury travel industry to accomplish this.
Wow. Okay, pretty cool. And the thing you have to think about is your audience, right? And to whom are you're communicating that to, and does it resonate, right? And so that's the other thing you're looking at these is I love the story, and it shows you're very diverse and your skills are applied in multiple places. If I'm in one of those industries, that might be good. Or if I'm in another one, you have to understand, does that resonate with me? But I like that a lot. Okay, behavioral questions. These are ones that, again, my theory on these is, you're at a company and the person that had your role before was a dick. And that person, set off a chain of events and they finally got rid of that person, and now you're the person coming in for the interview. And I'm being an exaggeration, but the idea is that there are people out there that, I mean, there are situations in a group that they're trying to make sure that don't happen again. And so they're going to ask you questions that are relevant to things that they're seeing, but they'll do it in an abstract kind of way. Tell me about a challenge or a conflict you faced at work. Often they're usually uplifting, but there's some ones that are kind of hard that you have to really think about. And this is one you have to think about and have a good answer ahead of time, which is, tell me a time where you failed and what you learned from that experience. And when that comes to you when you're not expecting it, your biggest failure pops into your head. And that is the one thing in the world you don't want to share with them. You do not want to share your biggest failure of all time, classic blunder, with them without having a good story, right? And so you have to know ahead of time what you've learned from these. So I've had some monumental failures, but what I've learned to do, I actually have, we'll go over this a little bit later. But I have my failures listed out. Where is it? Right there in the middle. I have failures listed out, and we'll talk about how we're going to do this a little bit later, where I had a botched interview, or I had an account where we had ads that were supposed to post and it didn't happen. I got a ton of email and angry phone calls Saturday morning from executives from the company. And the story of my failure results in actions I took, SOAR actions. So the situation was missing ads. We needed to make sure we had a good process, and we didn't have one. So I had to go off and invent a good process, establish new procedures, and the result was we didn't have a problem ever again, right? So yes, it was a monumental failure, but I learned from it, and that's really what they're looking for in this kind of question. Tell me about a time you had to really deal with someone upset, or they're usually some kind of conflict questions. So the idea of the SOAR model is you're clearly talking about the situation. What is the situation of the failure? What happened? And what was the thing why is this a problem? What's the objective that you were trying to meet that didn't get met? You took action, and the result was what? And the most important thing in this is that you're trying to also reveal your superpowers in the whole process. So in the event of David, who is passionate about collaboration, understanding content, right? Your source story should, and this area should reflect some aspect of your superpower. Not in every single story, because you're going to have multiple source stories, but you need to be finding every example of ways you are coming out through these stories as the hero, as the person with the cape. So this is an example I pulled from the web, and I just liked it. I think it's on the Indeed site, but it's just a good example of how you go about doing this. I would have you do these, but I think we're going to run out of time, and because I got more content to cover. But these stories are going to be really important for you to do and practice them. But this person had a problem with an email that he botched, and as a result, there was a ton of conflict that came after it. The team was confused. There was a lot of back and forth conversation and blaming, and the harmony of the company was disrupted as a result. So he's a leader, and he took responsibility, which was good. And he called a meeting to discuss and clarify. I'm assuming it's a he. That's bad. It's a person. Called an emergency meeting to clarify the changes, apologized for the error, which is important to do, and then made the corrective actions. And the result was X, right? We all have these. Every one of you should have at least 10 stories in your brain that that you did something that was remarkable. Your actions resulted in something really good. Whether it came from a failure or it came from just an idea, these source stories are ways you are going to be promoting yourself. Those 3 questions that Alex asks you: what are you looking for? Why are you looking? What are you looking for? And why are you good at it? The why are you good at it, you should have 5 or 10 reasons why you're good at it, backed up with source stories. Here was the situation. This is what we were trying to do. This is the action I took, and this is the result. You should have at least 10 of those.
Hey, let me ask you this, Mike.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Kathy. So I had a client one time that I asked that question in a mock interview, and he told a story about a time that he failed to take advantage of an opportunity. And what that taught him, that he had, anyway, there were opportunities and he had not gone, he had let other people go take, have them instead, and then he didn't have them. So is that just, they're not looking for that really? They really are looking
I'm
for it.
confused what the lesson he's trying to promote from that. I can tell
He
you a lot of
was-
bad stories, but what I mean,
Yeah,
if
the
you're
problem is
confused,
that,
if you're confused with what he's trying to promote on it, then the story didn't achieve its goal. Because I don't. Did you understand why he was trying to communicate with it?
right, he gave a story. So he said that when he was the head of a department and they offered they offered free training, free certifications and things, and he thought, well, I don't need that. I know everything. I'll let all my people go instead, and I'll cover their roles. And so he did that. And then years later, when he got laid off, he really needed those certifications. So he had not taken advantage of the opportunity that presented itself, and now he was having to pay for the same certifications that could have been his for free. And so he said it taught him a lesson about taking advantage of things when they came your way.
Not
But
the
it's
best
not,
example. I mean, there's the servant leader example, which he should promote in there. Not necessarily not necessarily lament the fact that he chose poorly. So in trying to communicate your superpowers, I don't think he communicated any superpowers other than, I mean, he was actually he did something I thought was good to communicate, which is servant leadership. Right? I'm standing back. I'm letting my team take this, and they benefited from whatever. That's a great story. Um, he did make a mistake, but as you're talking to an employer, I'm not certain. Again, this is just my feedback. Is I'm not certain that would be impressive as an employer. Gee, I need to take advantage of this means, well, maybe he's going to be thinking about himself more than he's been thinking of his team. That
okay.
kind of thing, right? So
Thank you.
that's why I would look at it.
What's your superpower?
My superpower, I've got a couple. One of them is humor, and I'm not joking about this, but the thing about humor that makes the job a lot easier is I've been in a lot of situations where there's just been gut wrenching work that has to be done, whether it's personnel changes or acquisitions or difficult people or really angry customers. And when you come in with a positive attitude and a couple of jokes that kind of shake things up a little bit, people are much more comfortable and confident working together. My other superpower is I'm a mentor and a coach, and I notice every team that I'm in, I'm usually in a leadership role, and I end up coaching everyone that works on the team as well as half the management that I work for. And I coach you and Shannon often in meetings when we have these. I always give you guys feedback. Several people on the call I've spoken to and I've coached them. So that's a natural thing I like doing. I think I do it well and I do it respectfully. And that's what I try to promote in my stories, are those examples. The situational ones are usually very similar to behavioral. I couldn't find a big difference, but they tend to be things like, what's your management style? You've got two big issues. How do you prioritize? You need to be aware of the kinds of questions that are going to come up. I'm not going to cover them all here, but I have a list of about 50 questions that are common, and you'll need to kind of make some intelligent guess of which ones you'll encounter, and we'll talk you through that process next. So now you're going to write these stories down. I showed you my failure card, and I've just made up some scenarios. And what I've done is I've practiced them. So in mine, one of them is a botched interview. This is a great story. So I was interviewing at a hardware company here in town, and I was assured that I was a shoo-in for the role because I was the last candidate left. And I was told very confidently that there's no one else in there and it's my job to lose. And you know what happened? I lost the role. In fact, I think I did. And what had happened was, when I got to the VP level, I froze, completely froze. I didn't have my stories clear and crisp. I spent too long in my answers, and I had a horrible interview. It wasn't with Visa, it was another company. But, and what I learned from it was, I mean, I changed my whole life after that. I started doing public speaking. I did a blog post on roadmaps because that's where my question was lost. I joined Product Job Club. I'm sorry, Product Camp Boston. Became a member of the board and did a couple talks there. I started coaching people in product management. I've read some books on roadmaps. I mean, I really made a big serious effort out of this because it made a huge impression. And so that's an example of a failure. It was monumental in my mind, but also it's the response that comes back after it. So what you're going to do is you're going to find these stories. Robert shared his story, his pitch, but you need to practice these. You need to practice them and practice them. What I do is I have an app called Otter, or I can just record them as well. And I practice and listen to these. And sometimes I don't even listen to them. I just want to recite them. I walk around with my cards sometimes before interviews, and I look at a word, botched interview at Visa, and I know the story. And I think of the SOAR example that I've been practicing, and it just becomes a natural way of doing it. Throughout that process, I'm trying to reveal my superpowers. What are the things I'm good at, and how do I tie those into the stories? And then you're going to create these little cue cards. Now I'll show you how I do them in the interviews a little bit later, but these are going to be very useful to have handy during the interview so you can pick up on them very quickly. An interview, there's so many questions come at you. Sometimes it's hard to remember the stories, and this is a nice way to organize them. We'll talk a little bit more about how to do that. Oh, here we go. This is how I do it. So this is my desk. And you'll notice that Mr. Rogers is right over here, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is my coaster. And what I do for my interviews is I have these cards laid out. As I'm writing notes down, right, I'm talking and looking at the screen because I'm a good interviewer and I want to look at the screen. But when I look down, you don't really know what I'm looking down at. I'm not showing my cards to you, and I have all these laid out where I can pull a card over onto my notes as I'm taking notes. It's very polite when they ask a question. Let me think about it. And you look down at your notebook and you start writing down some of those points. And so what you want to look at is you want to keep it organized where you can find it very quickly, find a way to organize them in your brain on maybe types, have them organized by key. You might use one story in different categories. Often they're going to ask you questions about you, about the company, about your failures, about working with teams, working with customers, maybe specific technologies that will be important in your career. And you're going to just create a list of 30 or so questions that you're going to have answers to. Some of them will be in stories, and some of them are just going to be stories. And you're going to practice and practice and practice these. What also you'll need to do for the interviews is you need to be really thinking about doing working as a pro. Really understand, and I'm not cutting on you. Not all of you are here for an interview, but when you think about, you've been in cases where people are far away from their microphones. This is my microphone. You know, I have it close by. I don't want to show it up like I'm a talk show host, but I have it just out of view, and it's not this. These aren't very expensive. You'll notice that the woman in the picture has a couple of things I want to point out. One is the camera is at eye level, and that you're the center, and that you don't have a lot of clutter. Now, I actually have too many cabinets back here. This is the Eagle Academy. This is all my Boy Scout memorabilia. I've got to declutter it. I'm going to take one of these cabinets out. But you want to make sure that it's not very cluttered. The nice thing about, oh, this is not the slide I wanted to show. Well, okay. I had a nice slide that shows sorry about that. Zoom has a feature where, actually several features, and you want to use the technology as much as you can. The Zoom technology has a presentation where if you're showing PowerPoint or Keynote, some kind of a presentation tool, you can use that as the background, and your little bobblehead pops up in the lower right-hand corner as you're presenting. So if you are going to be doing interviews where you still want to be present, but you want to show content, that's one of the ways. It's under the advanced model, under the advanced feature. It's a beta version for using your PowerPoint or your presentation as a background. You can also share other content, like you might have a tablet. You want to share your tablet that you might be drawing on or sketching ideas on. Or you might doing videos, you want to make sure you're sharing the audio from it. So use the technology if you're comfortable using it. If you're given a new tool, for instance, I had a life-size meeting recently, and I never used life-size, or someone used the Microsoft tools. I had to download them, and I had to make sure that they're all working correctly, making sure all my technology interfaces with that well. And the last one, which was the diagram I'm looking for, it's not here, is dress nicely. I was on an interview where the hiring manager was in a t-shirt, slumped back in his chair like this, and staring off to the side, looking at the computer screen. And okay, I don't want to be like that, right? I want to give you my eye attention. I want to give you, I want to look at you, even though I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at my camera, and you want to be present in that way for the interview. And you want to dress nicely, not necessarily suits, but not a t-shirt. Also, if think of the colors. We're on video now, so probably really important that you want to, like some of the shirts I wear, I kind of become one big dark blob. So I'm looking at contrast, and so I'm look at the colors that you're wearing as well. The other thing with COVID, just be aware that we're all well aware of COVID, but COVID has impact in everything that you're doing at the job you're looking at the company, and just be aware there are going to be situations that might come to your advantage over COVID. Working remotely is one of them. But understand the impact that it has on you and the company you're interviewing with. Okay. Any questions coming up, Kathy, before I
Yeah,
go into
there
the
was a
last part?
question, and I was waiting for the moment. So this guy says, at the suggestion of a coach, I prepared a one-page bio and replaced and put that in place of a traditional cover letter, as well as to share when I'm networking before I'm asked for a resume. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. I'll show you one. Robert has something similar as well, but it's a kind of a marketing sheet. Maybe you have to tone it down a little bit, but I have seen these one-pagers. Use them sparingly, right? They're not necessarily a replacing of a resume, but they're a good way to augment the resume, especially for us that have a very diverse set of background that covers over a wide period of time. A resume is not necessarily the best, but these marketing sheets, you call them, they're kind of useful to help people understand who you are and what you're all about. So we'll give you an example of that. The other thing about dressing, and just want to mention this, is I know we only worry about the waist up, but do, especially on interviews, dress the whole way, socks, shoes, the whole bit. Think of this as a real life interview. Not that anyone's going to look at your shoes, but you have seen a lot of embarrassing videos where people stand up and they're in their undies. So you don't want to be one of those kind of people. Any other questions, Kathy?
No, I just put in the chat box that I've had several people tell me that during their virtual interviews, they were asked to stand up. The company wanted to see if they were properly dressed from top to toe.
Interesting.
Here's one that says, how do you respond to a question about whether you're interviewing elsewhere? You said you'd cover that.
Yeah, so I tell them yes.
Whether you are or not.
But I don't feel it's appropriate to give them where. Right.
Okay.
The idea, here's the problem that they're looking at. Prior to COVID, and I've noticed over the last couple of years it's changed. The vetting process, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, to see if this makes sense, but a year or two ago it seemed like the vetting process was weeks or months long. I mean, months long, and people are very careful about hiring. And the challenge that we're running into is that so many people are job hopping right now that they're looking at multiple roles, and the companies have to respond by trying to shorten the hiring process, or they're losing people. That's what I'm hearing. Do you hear anything different?
Nope, I'm hearing that as well.
Right. So they're trying their best to get you through the process quickly, and they want to understand what kind of runway they have with you. And you don't want to make them feel like they got all the time in the world. So, I tell them, don't make it depends on how you position yourself for the search, right? If you're a desperate job seeker, don't make it look like you're a desperate job seeker, right? Make it look like this company you're talking to is the center of your universe and you're working with them. And yeah, I have some other interviews going on, but I really want to, I want to make this one work. So you do want to, say you've got something going on. Hopefully you do. But don't make it look like you've got, 2,000 resumes out there and 10 interviews lined up, because it doesn't give them a feeling of importance either. So make sure that they feel important, and that you feel that this is you're doing what you can to keep that process moving.
A related question, if you're talking to a third-party contractor and they ask you who else, what other contractors are you going through, do you feel that that's a question that you should answer? What other staffing companies or contractors are you using?
I think there's certain parts of my professional life aren't necessarily open book for people unless it's to my advantage. I'm represented by a couple companies, and trying to understand the motivation behind the question. Maybe what I'm guessing is, and this is just a guess, is often a company like Schwab is using contractors for hiring. They do a lot of contract to hire kind of roles. And it's not unusual. I've seen this happen where an opening comes up and I get hit up by 5 or 4 contracting companies looking to fill the role for the same role. What I think happens is for the staffing companies, they're worried about competition. And for the employer, they're making sure that they're giving proper credit. And you don't want to get in the middle of that if possible. So the more names you reveal, there becomes conflict, and you get thrown off their list.
Right.
So that's my opinion. If there's a reason that you think that they need to know that information, then share it. But otherwise, try to be evasive. It's really not their business, my personal opinion. But
you can always say I'm talking to other people, but none of them have sent me on this job, so there's no conflict here.
Right.
Okay.
This is the answer. Anything else, Kathy?
The only other thing was somebody brought up that in addition to the level of the camera and your background, make sure you have good lighting on your face.
So a funny story on that one is I've noticed a lot of people getting those lighting systems with the big round circle lighting systems. They were quite nice. Actually, on mine, I've got lights above me, and so it's by accident. So my lighting isn't too bad. Plus, I have a window that's bringing good light. But I noticed with people with glasses, as you can see the lighting system, and so some people who have those big circle ones, you see these big white circles on their glasses. So be aware of the lighting. Also on my screen, I can take my screen my screen intensity and dial it down so I don't see as much reflection on my glasses. Or if you're bold, take them off. But glasses tend to reflect a lot of the light that is being projected up. But yes, good lighting is important. Okay, so let me give you some resources, and I highly recommend for you 1s and 2s in these categories to consider the following. So for the mental, are you ready? Get your head on straight. You should already know this dynamic duo who was featured on, is that channel? What channel was that, Kathy?
I don't know. Shannon knows that. She's the publicist.
Okay. Anyway, they're on TV. I recognize.
It's the one on Metric. It was on Metric.
We are Austin. We are.
Oh yeah, we are Austin. I don't know what channel.
But anyway, Launchpad, right? The thing is, you're watching on this chat. There are a million people out here that are looking for help. Don't be afraid to reach out for help or helping others and get help along the way. There's a ton of resources, as you already know, that are available. That should be your very first step. There's 2 books that I bumped into that I think are awesome books. David Brooks, who is a commentator on PBS and on in the New York Times, is an unbelievable author about people and about the human nature of things. And he's written this book called The Second Mountain. And I love the book. And basically it talks about how in most of our careers, we're climbing the mountain and we've kind of reached a top of some sort, recognizing that's not the mountain we wanted to climb. You know, I got into electrical engineering and thought I'd work my way into a kind of job in technology. And I thought that was going to be my life. And I'm now looking at a second mountain going, I don't have to do that. I can do something completely different. And this gives you a lot of things in life, in relationships, and a lot of really good stories that come along with it that are just giving you a little confidence that life isn't that bad, right? You have a lot of things that are coming your way, and it's a good emotional boost. One of our people that has spoken at some of the clubs, Pam Otten, has just threw together a book on resources. It doesn't belong in here, but I wanted to throw it in here quickly to promote it. And it's a fairly inexpensive book, but it talks all the basic tools that you need to be starting to think about and connecting with for a job search here in Austin. So it's very specific to the Austin market. And I'm a huge fan of Pam. There's a guy named Chip Conley. Chip is a Silicon Valley guy. He just recently moved to Austin. He was worked in the hotel business and bumped into these guys from a little startup company called Airbnb. And he became kind of a mentor and executive coach for them, of helping them with their business and their business model. And he's written an amazing book, talks about the concept of what an elder in old societies used to be and what a modern elder looks like today. When you look at technology, we're in a really technology town. And even if you're not in a technology business, the technology influences every aspect of what we're doing here in town. You're going to see this difference between digital intelligence, so they call DX, and emotional intelligence, which is EX, and or EQ, DQ and EQ. A lot of these technology companies are filled with very, very smart people, but they don't have a lot of the emotional intelligence to really run the groups. And you see things like with Uber and with WeWorks, executives doing ridiculous things and putting the companies in great peril. And they need some people that help anchor that. And not just old people, but people that have wisdom and experience and that are basically the elders of a modern society. It's a wonderful book. And I highly recommend it. And so take a look at that. And then for those of you that are more spiritually oriented, Job Seekers is actually built out of a mega church up in northwest Austin, at the Hill Country Bible Church. And although they do a great program with job searching, they also touch on the spirit a little bit more if that is something that appeals to you. But you need to find some way to get help in this space, that you have to get out of your funk, reach out to people, talk to people, meetups, social distance gatherings, whatever you need to do to get out of this funk, because this is the first one you have to get through. The second one group is Know What You Want. And we're going to talk a little bit about Alex, but there's two books that I bumped into. There's 50 ways to get a job. I'm in a job club for product managers here in Austin, and we're helping people pivot into product management jobs. So a lot of people, especially young professionals who are either just got their MBA or they've been in a role, they want to become product managers. And we have several cohorts around town that are working through this book, but we're doing it as product managers. And these are very generic. They're broken up in different sections. One of them is mapping out your career, what you've been doing over your career, all the highs and lows. What these are exercises to help you kind of put your head on and look at where you've been and kind of give you some better understanding of where you're going and help you put some knowledge about what you want to be really wanting to do. And it's some of the exercises, it's 50 exercises. They're all pretty small. Each chapter is maybe 2 or 3 pages long. Some of them you look at and say they're garbage. Some of them you look at and they're going to change your life. But I recommend that. A workbook that Alex recommends is the Navigating Successful Job Transitions. And it's a pretty thick workbook, but there's a couple really good worksheets and techniques in there that really help you understand what are you looking for, what are your non-negotiables for a future employer, and help you get your head on straight. Then we have coaches. Shelley Pernod is my coach. I really respect her a lot. I've worked with her for a while. Highly recommend her. Mark Miller, who you've probably met many times at Job Club. He also does coaching, also has a book and a website and talks about pivoting careers. And Alex McCarthy, who I seem to have a lot of fondness for, he specializes in helping people, mostly in the product management community, but he's also very good in this space. Let's see what's next. What's your story? So the 3 questions, I have actually bookmarked the actual moment where Alex in his talk, and I recommend listening to the whole talk, but actually at the time spot where he starts talking about the 3 questions at a talk he did a couple of years ago. He talks about this worksheet, the 3 questions worksheet, and I've given that up. And I'll show you this other worksheet. We'll talk about that in a minute, which was coming up as a question earlier. Alex also talks about the SOAR interviews in his last one he did with Product Camp, with Launchpad. I have that talk in there as well. 23 minutes in, he does his example on SOAR examples, which is very useful. And then there's the product job, the target job profile, and we'll show you what that looks like. That is useful to start filling in. Again, that's done with conjunction with listening to Alex's talks as well as the workbook. Here's a shameless plug for one of my talks. I did this talk at Austin Up. It's called SWAT at Your Next Interview, and basically it's breaking the mold of interviews where, again, be very careful doing this, but if you're going into a place and you really think you are a good fit and you think you have a good understanding, or at least 80% understanding of some of the problems that you think you can solve, there's a talk that talks about how to put together a kind of a mini presentation, a SWOT analysis you do, how you go about doing the interviews with people, a template to use for the actual presentation, and some tips and tricks of how to get some of that information. It's useful in the fact that it changes the game on an interview, but I've done it multiple times. It's really either highly successful or total failures, or I don't even use it. I built one up not too long ago, and I never had the chance to actually use it during the interview. So, it's useful to look at, and I think it's good information to have. And then we'll talk about the 30 questions in a moment. So a quick summary, and then I'm going to walk you through some of the slides. Make sure you're ready to start your search. Be able to answer the 3 questions and answer them like they're poetry coming out of your mouth. Network, network, network. Network for jobs, network for coaching, for interviews, network for your SOAR examples. Do everything you can on your networking. Take advantage of all these people who are posting their profiles on and connect with them. Create your list of 30 questions. We'll go over that in the worksheets in a second. Do practice interviews where you're practicing these examples and find peers that you're working with that you can talk to, and then reach out for help. Right? Again, through this group, through Kathy, through Shannon, through me, through a number of people that you've seen. Never be afraid to reach out. They may not always respond, but don't be afraid of reaching out for help. Right? You're not in this alone. That's why this community is so important, and take advantage of it. So last thing I want to show you is I sent you a link of in there. You should be brought to the resources that we mentioned. The presentation you just saw is here. There's a little book called 12 Interview Questions Exposed. This is by Abby. She calls herself Absolute Abby. She's spoken in Austin several times.
Abby
I found
Kohut.
a PDF. I'm sorry?
Abby Kohut, Kohut.
But I found an older version of it. They don't do the behavioral questions, but it's a useful little book to have just so you have them, and it's another good resource. I have 30 questions here. I have them organized by behavioral questions. Oh, I thought I deleted the product manager. You don't need to see the product manager ones. questions, basically a bunch of questions that I put together that I think are that I'm seeing coming up, and then questions for the employer. Oh, this is not the right worksheet. My apologies. 30 questions on interviews. Oh, I'll add them back in there. I had questions for the employers. I'll add this in after the meeting, but I have several questions that you ask of employers posted in here as well, that you should have those ready in the event that you're doing an interview. And then 3 questions from Alex, and then the target job profile. This is helping you really think about what you're looking for. And you can adapt this in that model, that one pager, or you can kind of blend them together. Some of the information you may not want to share. Like I might not necessarily want to share with employer my compensation. Maybe you do. Your career values are important for you to understand. Maybe you want to share them with an employer. And then that work, some of those workbooks will explain what this is all about, and you can adapt it to whatever you need. That should be about it. So my information's here, my email, my LinkedIn profile. I have to update my blog. I haven't updated in a while. I've got a couple things to post on there, and the presentation. Any questions?
Okay, there is a question about, should you ask in an interview, is this a new position or are you filling a present one?
That's a great question, and yes, you should ask.
And then there's
And
another
then
one
let me expand on that. You should ask because you also understand what happened if someone left. What happened? They may not want to answer, but it's good. It's good information to know. And if you're really bold, you should know ahead of time by looking at LinkedIn profiles of people who used to work in the company and have the same job title you're going after. So maybe you even know who that person is. Go ahead.
One says, can you recommend any resources for improving your networking game? For the longest time, the Bible for networking, it's kind of old now, but I don't know if you can recommend it, but it's by Keith Ferrazzi, and it's called Never Eat Alone. And he just talks about taking advantage of every possible experience to connect and follow up and so forth. But that's been kind of the Bible of networking for a very long time.
You're asking an extrovert how to talk to people, and that's not a good question to ask an extrovert. So I wouldn't even think of reading a book. That's an interesting question. I would start with a group of people that you can trust. I don't know if you're an introvert, but you start with a group of people that you trust, that know you to some level, and start with just getting comfortable with having a discussion. You might want to read a book on it, or there's probably some videos on it. But I think the best thing to do is, I know a lot of people who read a lot of books but don't do a lot of work, because I think the book is an excuse to not do the work. I would really recommend reaching out to anyone on this list that's popping their profiles up. If anyone looks interesting, literally send them an invite and then see if you can get on the phone with them for a half hour and chat. Then learn about the meetup groups that are relevant to your space. There's a ton of meetups going on online. The challenge with these groups, and we're seeing it here, is that it's not a lot of good times for face-to-face talk. So you have to find ways to leverage that into getting some face-to-face talks. And occasionally some meetups are doing social gathering at bars or public areas, and maybe you tried some of those. But I would really just start putting your heads down and looking at the core organizations that are relevant to your profession, and using this group as a first step, and then your circle of friends. What else, Kathy?
The only other one is, can you recommend, no, wait. Are personal websites important or expected?
In marketing, they are. A lot of them are they're looking at portfolios. I think if you have a good portfolio to share, that's very useful. I've noticed my LinkedIn profile. I post some of my talks on LinkedIn, and I have noticed recruiters or some people I've spoken to have referenced some of my talks. And so, you want to showcase who you are, your superpowers, and if you're good with it. Again, in marketing, that's almost required by some people, especially in digital design. They're looking for portfolios. So if you have the time and you can do it, then do try it. I've experimented with it. I haven't really been good at it. My blog is actually quite old. I need to update it. But yeah, I do recommend them.